The Chinese, armed with clubs and machetes, have been demonstrating against Muslim communities. Our correspondent is there.
They're carrying homemade weapons, wooden poles, steel poles and other implements. They're saying that the authorities aren't doing the job, so they're going to take it into their own hands.
We'll be looking at the way China is handling this crisis. Also tonight, the debate about assisted suicide as Parliament rejects plans to protect relatives and friends from prosecution.
By going with this amendment, we turn the traffic lights from red to green on state-sanctioned assisted dying.
In Los Angeles, thousands celebrate the life of Michael Jackson as his children pay their own tribute.
Ever since I was born, Daddy has been the best father you could ever imagine.
And as the Home Ashes series moves to satellite TV, what are the prospects for some of our other major sporting events?
In BBC London News, too focused on tackling violence, criticism of the Met over their G20 tactics. And a new report says immigrants don't jump the queue for social housing.
Good evening. China is struggling to contain the ethnic violence in the western region of Xinjiang. Tonight, they've imposed a curfew to try to stop the fighting. Hundreds of Chinese, armed with clubs and machetes, took to the streets earlier today to demonstrate against the mainly Muslim Uyghur community. Our correspondent Quentin Somerville has spent the day in the regional capital, Urumqi.
In Urumqi's Muslim quarter, hundreds of Uyghur women pour onto the streets. They rushed to confront the troops who'd taken control of their neighbourhood. Old and young women alike shook their fists and demanded the return of local men who'd been rounded up overnight, accused of taking part in Sunday's riot. These defenders of Chinese rule rarely come face to face with such defiance, but they did today, and they retreated.
The most extraordinary scenes here. Hundreds of local women, many of them Uyghur women, and some men have gathered on the street. Despite the fact there are lots of police here and lots of armed police here, they're shouting, "We want our freedom, we want our men back."
It would be even better to shoot us and kill us than to live like this. The people that protested the other day on the riots, men and women, we heard they were killed and died in a very, very tragic way.
Our government minders push us away. The women, they said, wouldn't be arrested. Later in the city centre, a solid body of Han Chinese men decided it was their turn to take to the streets.
Hundreds of Han Chinese have been marching through the centre of Urumqi all afternoon. They're saying, "Down with the Uyghurs, protect Xinjiang." As you can see, they're carrying homemade weapons, wooden poles, steel poles and other implements. They're saying that the authorities aren't doing the job, so they're going to take it into their own hands.
At the moment, every country is safeguarding world peace and harmony, so we have to do this. Our nation should unite. Our society is such a good one. Why can't we live normally in it?
It was the Han Chinese who bore the brunt of the savage attacks during Sunday's riots. The violence in Xinjiang was sparked by killings several thousand miles away in southern China. Uyghur groups in exile say that amateur video placed on the internet show a Uyghur man chased by a mob of Han Chinese running for his life. They claim he was one of 2 killed in a revenge attack after false rumours of Uyghur men attacking a local woman. What happens next is too disturbing to show. This evening, more paramilitary troops arrive in Urumqi in an attempt to restore the peace, but the two groups who share the city have never seemed so far apart. Quentin Somerville, BBC News, Urumqi in western China.
As Quentin was suggesting there, for many years there's been a volatile relationship between the Uyghur people and the Chinese authorities. The tensions have been rising, but there are suggestions that the Chinese government has adopted a less inflexible approach to international reporting of the unrest. Our security correspondent, Frank Gardner, looks at the latest signals.
Deadly tensions in a place largely unknown to the rest of the world. But the problems between ethnic Uyghurs and Han Chinese have been simmering for years. The Uyghurs say their homeland is being forcibly colonized. The government says it's a conspiracy from outside.
The oppression has reached an unbearable level. They've banned our language from schools and transported girls from the countryside to the interior. They've arrested 15,000 people in the last 2 years, and they have no access to lawyers.
More and more people in the world have witnessed the conspiracy of foreign forces to separate Chinese territory and the violent nature of their behaviour.
In China, there are officially 55 ethnic minorities. The largest are in Inner Mongolia and Tibet, and the Uyghurs in Xinjiang province. Of these, the ones that get the most international attention are the Tibetans and the Uyghurs. Both regions have suffered from violence. Last year, Chinese media said an attack in Xinjiang province killed 16 policemen. Ethnic Uyghurs were blamed. Separately, several Uyghurs from camps in Afghanistan have been imprisoned in Guantanamo Bay. Also last summer, Tibet erupted into violence. It was heavily repressed with martial law, journalists were kept out, and there was international condemnation. But this time, the authorities are being surprisingly open.
I think the Chinese government has learned lessons from its handling of the rioting in Tibet last year. Last year, the Chinese government didn't allow in any international journalist. That was strongly criticized, both domestically and internationally. That also meant that the Chinese government position didn't gain any sympathy.
For the Chinese premier and the wider leadership, this is largely about damage limitation. Later this year, they'll be celebrating 60 years of the People's Republic. So they want the population to see Han Chinese as the victims and the instigators as coming from outside China. Xinjiang's violence is definitely in the world's spotlight. But now the battle begins as to just who is to blame. Frank Gardner, BBC News.
There's been an impassioned debate in the House of Lords on changing the law on assisted suicide. The former Lord Chancellor, Lord Faulkner, proposed that a relative or friend who helps a person to die abroad shouldn't be prosecuted in England and Wales. More than 100 British people have travelled to Switzerland to die with the help of the organisation Dignitas. But as our medical correspondent Fergus Walsh reports, tonight's proposal was eventually defeated.
In a matter of months, this woman says she will have taken her life in an assisted suicide in Switzerland. We're protecting her identity because she doesn't want her carers to know. Multiple sclerosis is making her progressively weaker. She wants a friend to be with her when she dies.
It is quite unbelievable the difference it would make if I could take somebody with me without threat of them being questioned by the police and the threat of prosecution. I wouldn't have to go alone. I wouldn't have to die alone.
This is the room in Zurich where many Britons have gone to die an assisted suicide. It's thought 115 in all since 2002. The organisation Dignitas currently has nearly 800 members from the UK. The Lord's amendment would have removed the threat of prosecution from relatives or friends of those seeking an assisted suicide abroad. 2 doctors would have to certify that the person travelling was terminally ill and competent to make such a decision. It was proposed by a former Lord Chancellor who explained why the police had never yet brought charges.
Nobody plainly wishes to prosecute in those cases because nobody, in my view correctly, has the stomach to prosecute in cases of compassionate assistance.
It represents a humane clarification and improvement on the current law with appropriate safeguards.
But there were many opposed, including religious and legal figures. Baroness Campbell, who has a serious life-threatening disability, said it would send all the wrong signals.
By going with this amendment, we turn the traffic lights from red to green on state-sanctioned assisted dying, be it in another country.
With this legal amendment, we create a climate in which the terminally ill, the disabled and the elderly who are sick feel even more profoundly vulnerable.
Contents
141.
Peers voted by a majority of 53 to reject the amendment, once again defeating attempts to alter the suicide laws. Catherine says many disabled people will be relieved the law is not changing. She's concerned the proposals were even allowed to be debated.
It sends out all the wrong messages and it reinforces the negative images that people have of disability and terminal illness.
Many more will undoubtedly follow the same path as Dr. Anne Turner, whose children were by her side when she died in Switzerland 3 years ago. Relatives are unlikely to be prosecuted, but the threat of criminal charges will remain. Fergus Walsh, BBC News.
A public celebration of Michael Jackson's life has been held in Los Angeles this evening. The singer's coffin was taken to the arena following a private funeral service. There have been tributes from the Reverend Al Sharpton and Stevie Wonder and music from Mariah Carey and Lionel Richie. Let's join our correspondent Matthew Price, who's at the centre.
There had been fears from some here that this might degenerate into some sort of tacky money-making venture. We do, after all, know that a DVD of this memorial service is due to be released. And yet, having been inside, I can tell you that at times it was intensely moving. Certainly for the fans there, and indeed the friends and family of Michael Jackson, this was a fitting memorial service. Michael Jackson was brought back into the limelight one last time. The star who both delighted in publicity and strove to hide from it, once again the focus of the world's attention. His children have been largely kept away from the cameras since their father's death. Today, they mourned with the rest of the family.
Ever since I was born, Daddy has been the best father you could ever imagine. And I just wanted to say I love him so much.
This was a public memorial. It was also, though, an intensely private affair.
I love you, Michael, and I'll miss you.
Mariah Carey was the first star to appear. Lionel Richie.
Will be our salvation.
Then Stevie Wonder performed in front of Michael Jackson's coffin, laid in front of the stage where he was rehearsing his London concerts in the days before his death. And then Michael Jackson spoke in a video montage of his life. When they showed that signature moonwalk, Michael Jackson's fans in the audience cheered. Jermaine Jackson then sang his brother Michael's favourite song, Smile, by Charlie Chaplin.
If you just smile.
This was the first we saw of Michael Jackson's coffin, earlier and just after a short private memorial. The police closed LA's highways for the funeral cortege. In downtown LA, the fans queued up for the public memorial. Inside, the next generation performed. 12-year-old Shaheen Jaffagoli, a finalist in Britain's Got Talent, 7 years older than Michael Jackson was when his career started.
I just want to thank him so much for blessing me and every single individual on this earth with his amazing music. And just thank you very much. I love you, Michael Jackson.
The end came, fittingly, with this, the song for Africa that Michael Jackson co-wrote.
It was really interesting. It was really somber at times, just grieving the loss, and at other times really joyful, just remembering everything that he gave to this world.
Oh, everybody's hurt. Everybody's crushed all over the world.
And then Michael Jackson left the stage. For many, he was a controversial, faded pop star. But there have been few artists like him. And today, even in death, Michael Jackson was still dazzling fans around the world.
Well, Matthew, now that the memorial event is concluded, where is attention likely to be focused next?
Well, there are very few facts now, Hugh, that we have left. We know that the family is having a private lunch at the moment, and then, of course, speculation turns to where Michael Jackson might be buried. That is indeed if the intention is to bury him. He could, of course, be cremated. There's a bit of gossip and rumour swirling around here, which has led some news companies to send their satellite trucks back up the 2 hours north from LA to Neverland, the ranch that Michael Jackson once lived in case he is to be buried there. We simply don't know. So the service, Hugh, may be over, but the Michael Jackson story most certainly lives on.
Matthew, thank you very much. Matthew Price there in Los Angeles. Coming up on tonight's programme. The Olympic Games in all their glory, but how long will such sporting treasures be free to view? A memorial to the victims of the London bombings, which happened 4 years ago today, has been officially dedicated in Hyde Park. The Prince of Wales said the attacks on 3 underground trains and a bus had caused cruel and mindless carnage. The memorial is formed of 52 steel pillars, one for each of the victims, as June Kelly reports.
In a summer deluge on the edge of Hyde Park, thoughts were on that July morning 4 years ago. London had become the latest Western target of Islamist terrorism. The memorial has 52 pillars, one for each of the victims. Some of their families have been involved in formulating the design.
We want people to walk through it and touch it, and we want children to be able to run and play in it as well. Most of the people that died were quite young, so we wanted it to be user-friendly, if you like.
The suicide bombers blew up a bus and 3 underground trains at the height of the rush hour. Several hundred people were injured in this act of mass murder. Here for this ceremony, the Prime Minister and the leaders of the other political parties. The Prince of Wales, who first met the families after the bombings, spoke to them again privately today before the ceremony.
I do feel that perhaps I have just some small awareness of the shattering loss you have all suffered, as I can only too well recall the intense despair and many other emotions that I experienced when my beloved great-uncle Lord Mountbatten was murdered by terrorists 30 years ago next month.
The victims were remembered individually.
James Adams, Sam Badham and Lee Christopher Harris, Lee Baisden, Phil Bear.
All ages, various nationalities, different religions. The usual cross-section of London travellers. And with their names in the air, a minute's silence to reflect on what had been lost.
I think we're very thankful for the Prince and the Duchess and all the other people that have come together to express their feelings of compassion for us.
We've been privileged to be in the presence of, so many dignified survivors and other families of people who were lost. And so, with all the sorrow, there's been a great joy in today as well.
52 families changed forever on the 7th of July 2005. June Kelly, BBC News in Hyde Park.
A British soldier and 2 Canadians have been killed in a helicopter crash in southern Afghanistan. The incident happened on takeoff from an American base in Zabul province. The British soldier, whose next of kin have been informed, is the 6th British serviceman to die there in the past week. And the soldier killed on Sunday in Helmand province has been named as Lance Corporal Dane Elson of the 1st Battalion, Welsh Guards. The government has survived a rebellion in the Commons tonight following that decision to abolish the 10p rate of income tax. 18 Labour MPs joined the Tories and the Lib Dems, demanding more compensation for those people affected. The government had warned that defeat would have ruined the entire budget package. David Davis, the former Shadow Home Secretary, has accused MI5 of outsourcing torture. He was speaking just a few minutes ago in Parliament about the case of Rangzib Ahmed, who was convicted in December last year of directing terrorism. Our Home Affairs correspondent, Daniel Sanford, has the story.
Rangzib Ahmed surrounded by police on his return to Britain. Now a convicted Al-Qaeda terrorist, his case was described tonight as an evidential showcase of British complicity in torture. The allegation was made by David Davis using parliamentary privilege to avoid secrecy laws.
What I'm talking about today is just as much about defending our own civilised standards as it is about deploring what was done to this man in the name of defending our country.
Ahmed had been under surveillance in Britain starting in 2005, and by the summer of 2006 there was enough evidence to charge him. But instead of detaining him in Manchester, the police and MI5 allowed him to leave the country and fly to Pakistan, where on the 20th of August he was arrested. David Davis says this was done at the suggestion of the British. The Pakistanis, notorious for their treatment of terrorist suspects, took him into custody and apparently tortured him. Ahmed says he was beaten with sticks, whipped with tyre rubber, and had 3 fingernails removed from his left hand. David Davis says that once Rangzib Ahmed had been arrested in Pakistan, it was the security service MI5, along with Greater Manchester Police, who drew up the list of questions to be put to him. And it was MI5 who arranged for that list to be sent to the Pakistani intelligence agency, the ISI. Ahmed says that when he was being interrogated, the questions came from a document marked UK-Pakistan secret. He says he was visited in detention by MI5 and MI6 officers, but they never returned after he complained he was being tortured. Then in September 2007, more than a year after he was detained in Pakistan, he was deported and flown back to Britain, where before he even stepped off the plane he was arrested and subsequently tried and convicted of directing a terrorist organisation.
A more obvious case of the outsourcing of torture, a more obvious case of passive rendition, I cannot imagine.
Of course, MI5 and MI6 can't respond directly to the claims, but the government has repeatedly insisted that the intelligence agencies do not condone or collude in torture. And at Rangzib Ahmed's trial, the judge didn't accept many of his allegations. Daniel Sandford, BBC News.
The Ashes series will start tomorrow at Sophia Gardens in Cardiff. England will be hoping to revive the spirit of their victory back in 2005 when they took back the Ashes from Australia for the first time in 18 years. This year, cricket fans will have to pay to watch it on satellite television. The Ashes used to be on a list of major events protected for terrestrial television. But now there are big questions about how long events, such as the Olympic Games, will remain free to view, as our sports editor Mihir Bose explains.
Talk of sport and you recall great moments. Remember France 1998?
To bring him down, it's still Michael Owen. He scored a wonderful goal.
Beijing 2008 and the world's fastest man. Or the 2005 Ashes series. One of English cricket's greatest moments. That was freely available to all. This series will only be on pay television. A review of so-called listed events is ongoing, but I understand cricket will not return.
This is the 4th review, and the previous ones have all concluded that what was done with cricket was very sensible. It certainly made all the difference to thousands and thousands of people around the country and their cricket clubs.
The listing for these sporting crown jewels that cannot just be on subscription channels include Wimbledon, Derby, the Grand National, the English and Scottish Cup finals, and the World Cup and European Championships.
Boy beginning to turn on the style.
Britain's Olympic success last year brought the nation together, creating new heroes.
Oh, he's got it! He cruises to the line!
But now Olympic chiefs are for the first time talking of selling some of their golden moments to pay television.
Even if we go to a pay-per-view or a cable television or a subscription television, you still would have the obligation to add the most important events of the games free to air.
16,000 people will be here in Cardiff tomorrow for the start of the Ashes series. But it's not just cricket. All sports generate great passion and command devoted loyalty. Top-class sporting action can produce such compelling drama that television companies pay huge sums of money for the rights. BBC pay around £250 million a year, Sky around 750 million. That sort of money shows how the sports world has changed since Botham's Ashes summer of 1981. Some of the changes will not be reversed, despite fans' fondness for the old days.
I think they're part of British life, and the Ashes and certain football matches, internationals and that sort of thing, and Wimbledon should certainly be free.
I've grown up watching it on either BBC or Channel 4 and I never had to pay. So I don't think it's right. I don't think you should ever have to pay for something that big, a national sport, which, you know, has been going on for hundreds of years.
Sport has a unique capacity to bring the nation together around evocative moments. The challenge for any sport is to make sure its search for money does not reduce its appeal to a wider audience. Mihir Bose, BBC News, Cardiff.
Well, there's more national and international news on the BBC News channel, but now we can join our news teams where you are. Have a good night.
Hello and a very good evening from BBC London News. I'm Louisa Preston. The Met Police has been accused of focusing too much on tackling violence during the G20 instead of allowing peaceful protest. The accusation comes in a report which looked at police tactics during the demonstrations in April, in which one man died. Andy Ty has this report.
Tens of thousands of people took to the streets at G20, a major challenge for the Metropolitan Police. At first, the operation seemed to be a success, but then came the death of Ian Tomlinson and questions were raised about police tactics. Were officers too heavy-handed? Did they block legitimate protest? Inspector of Police